Hello and welcome to this new quick video workshop where I will demonstrate how you can knit multiple knot pull string projects in just one tube and how to separate them. In this tube I have knitted 3 different projects and I will demonstrate to you how to do that. So heyo, let's go. You need 2 colors of scrap yarn or waste yarn for the separation. We do a normal cast on with our scrap yarn, our normal zigzag cast on, and we knit a couple of rows with our scrap yarn, say 5. Then you cut your scrap yarn long enough that it touches the table and you put into the feeder the next color of scrap yarn. Put the tails always between the last and the first needle in the same spot. Between the last and the first needle, and make sure that those tails are also long enough that they touch the table. Otherwise they will get loose. And then you are going to knit one single round with that color of yarn. Make sure that every single hook grabbed this color of yarn and then cut it long enough that it touches the table and put it to the inside at the same place in the same spot between the last and the first needle, and then grab your working yarn. Put a very long tail into the middle of the machine because you need that for your finishing off, and start knitting your project. This method is not suited for pull string projects, so it's not for hats that you will only close by pulling the string. When you have knitted your project, you cut your yarn very long because you need it to close your tube later. Cut it long and put it to the inside. Also in the same spot between the last and the first needle, and then grab your scrap yarn and you are going to knit one single round with this scrap yarn. The first row or round before and after your actual project needs to be with just one row or round of scrap yarn to separate it from the rest of the scrap yarn. I'm going to change my scrap yarn to the next color, always in the same spot between the last and the first needle, so every needle has knitted just one time that color. And now I'm going to knit a couple of rows or rounds with my second color of scrap yarn. That will secure the stitches. So when you're not used to this method, knit about 10 rows. When you're used to this method, you need only 5 rows because you know what to do then and you will not unravel your work. So I'm going to knit about a couple of rows. And then I cut my scrap yarn also long enough that it touches the table. And now I'm going to put in another row with the first color of scrap yarn, and this one will separate the projects. Always in the same spot, always at the same place. One row, and then change the scrap yarn again to the second color of scrap yarn. It looks complicated, but when I have finished this project, it will all become clear. So I'm putting my second color of scrap yarn also to the inside at the same spot, long enough that it touches the table, always between the last and the first needle. You decide what needle is your last and your first needle. And then I'm going to knit a couple of rows with this color of scrap yarn. It looks like a lot of work, but it will save so much time. And then again you are going to change to the first color of scrap yarn, because that's the row that will connect the scrap yarn to your second project. I'm connecting now my last project with a single strand of scrap yarn in the same place. I knit just one row. I cut my yarn long enough that it touches the table. It's always the same. The scrap yarn is just one row or multiple rows. And then I'm going to knit my last project. I make a long tail and put it to the inside, and I put the yarn between the last and the first needle, and I'm going to knit my last project, and then I will demonstrate how to finish it off. I'm knitting my last row of my last project. I'm cutting my working yarn with a long tail, and I put it to the inside in the same spot between the last and the first needle. I need that tail to finish off that last project. And now I'm going to knit one row with scrap yarn, because that row will separate my scrap yarn from my project. I cut my tail long enough that it touches the table, because I don't need it to finish it off my project. But it needs to be that long, otherwise it can get loose. And then I'm going to knit a couple of rows or rounds with the second color of scrap yarn. I always say at least 5, but when you're new to this, knit about 10. And when you think you're done, you just cut your yarn and you keep on knitting until your work falls from your machine. Maybe you need to help it a little bit by pushing down the loops on the needles. And when it's released, untangle it and get rid of all the yarn that's tangled around it. So, let's look at this tube. This tube contains 3 different projects, and my scrap yarn is black and white. Every project is connected with one row of scrap yarn, and you will find all those scrap yarn ends with the working yarn together in the same spot. The one row scrap yarn is to separate projects from scrap yarn, or to separate projects from each other without losing stitches. So it's very simple. A single row between every different part, and then you can separate the projects from each other in just 1 single second by pulling out the one row between the 2 same color of scrap yarn pieces. I'm pulling out at the opposite point there than where the tails hang. You pull it out, and there is the magic. They separate without problems, and your stitches are secured by the scrap yarn, and you can easily pick up all stitches by circular knitting needles or crochet hook, or you can close the tube. If you don't know how to do that, see the description of this video for a video for that. So I'm going to demonstrate it again. Scrap yarn project, scrap yarn for the next project, and in between is that one single row, and you are going to pull that out, and there is the magic again. And now my 3 projects are separated and ready for finishing off whatever way you like. I hope you enjoyed this video and find it helpful. Please give me a thumb up if you like this video, and subscribe to my channel to miss nothing. Bye bye.